Welcome to Bring Back the Porch. Today we have a special video for you. If you or anyone you know enjoys paranormal activity or anything like that, please go check out Miller's Emporium on Facebook for any upcoming tour dates. Link will be in the description. Thank you to Tamara for inviting us on the trolley. Enjoy the video.
Okay, so tonight we're going to start with a ghost story that is going to be split into two parts, and that is about the Assiniboia. Does everybody know where the Assiniboia is? I think everybody does. And from what I understand, is this story is just the tip of the iceberg about the stories from the Assiniboia. The Assiniboia was built in the early 1900s and was located across the street from its current location now. So it was where that Train Alberta building is. It used to be where the original Assiniboia was. It was a very classy hotel with beautiful rooms and a men's sports store and bowling alley just right inside the building. It also had a large foyer where, I quote, ladies of convenience could be found. And right here we have the Assiniboia that is currently standing, that is now being converted into condos. Now, like I said, this is where ladies of convenience could be found. So just to be clear, the Assiniboia was not a brothel, as there were already 3 of those in Medicine Hat at that time. The Assiniboia foyer is just where the ladies like to visit with the men. The original Assiniboia burned down in the late 1940s, but greener pastures were right across the street. The Huckville block was directly across the street on the corner, and it was one of Medicine Hat's classiest buildings. And it soon became the new home of the Assiniboia Hotel that is now known as the Assiniboia Inn, and many other things. It is said that $1 million was spent on that renovation. But remember, this was in the 1940s, and $1 million then is not the same as $1 million today. It had a Chicago-style architecture that was slowly lost over time. It had a fancy little restaurant with a checkerboard floor, 9-foot ceilings, and black walnut paneling throughout the inside foyer. It had valet parking, bellhops, and a manually operated elevator. It also included a small bar and a lounge. The bar was a tavern, and it had a men's section and a ladies and escort section. That's right, ladies. Women were not allowed to enter the bar without a male as her escort. This part of the building has now been demolished and will become a new parking lot. Power to the ladies. In the basement was a banquet room that was attached to the restaurant, and this is where the first casino was in Medicine Hat. And eventually it evolved into Teaser's Strip Club. Is there anybody on board who's familiar with Teaser's Strip Club? Anybody at all? Don't be shy.
Yes.
Did you work there, ma'am?
Whoa.
No. Would you like to give us a demo?
No, I just went for the cheap drinks.
The cheap drinks. So you're familiar with Teaser's Strip Club. No judgment, we promise. Now I know you're wondering how all of this relates to ghosts, but you see I have to share a bit of history before getting to the good stuff. I'm actually going to go back a little bit. We're going to drive by the Assiniboia again. As you can see, it's seen better days, but it actually is being worked on, and I've heard it's turning into condos, and they might have a little bit of a shopping center in the bottom. Anybody who does buy a condo from here is going to want to purchase some sage as well. I hear this building is very busy, and I hear more stories every time I get on this trolley, so. Okay. Since we're heading that direction, David lived in a duplex on 1st Street Southeast that was once occupied by a man named Al. Now one would think the entire building would be haunted, and not just the one suite, but David claims that only his unit was haunted, as all the other ones seemed to be fine. After discussing his experiences with the tenants in the opposite suite, he found that they had had no activity at all. David only met Al once before his passing. Al's place would soon be up for rent, and David was the perfect candidate. Al was sitting in his recliner when David viewed the home, and David said that he seemed like a very nice guy. But much to his surprise, Al never really left and became David's ghostly roommate. After discussion with his neighbors, David learned that Al was from Newfoundland and that he didn't want to leave his apartment, but he was in the late stages of cancer, so going home to his family was the best place for him to be. but Al must have really liked that apartment, as he continued to live there long after his passing. Al made his presence known several times while David lived in the home. Before David worked the night shift, he would be sure to turn off all the lights and make sure that the dog was in his kennel. When he returned home, the lights would be on and the dog was found roaming the house. After a long night shift, David would often come home to find dog poop on the floor. There was a time when David's mom spent the night at his place and was rather surprised that he hadn't told her that he had a roommate, as she had seen a man in the house during her stay. David was put back by this comment, as he made it very clear with his mother that he did not have a roommate, and nor did he want a roommate. She claimed to have seen a gentleman standing in the doorway of the room where she slept, a gentleman with long blonde hair standing there watching her, a gentleman who looked just like Al. After that, she refused to spend another night there. Okay. So I'm going to go off the cuff here a little bit. And I recently had a tour of a building downtown. They gave me whatever information I wanted, and they said I can share it all. They didn't care at all. The building I'm speaking of is where Core is. We're actually just driving by it here right away. Is everybody familiar with that building? It used to be a grocery store. It was an OK economy, which is scary in itself because it makes me feel old because I used to work at an OK economy. But apparently underneath was the old Toronto Street School. And so they hear doors slamming a lot. A lot of people who are there will hear doors opening and closing, or they'll hear footsteps running up and down the hallways. But there was one lady, her name's Debbie, and she was working there alone one night, and she had left her office and then came back to her office, and something in the office across from her caught her eye. So she stopped and looked, and all of a sudden the glass in the window of that office shattered to the ground, completely shattered right in front of her eyes. She gave me a tour, and apparently it's the basement has a lot of activity, and they have a certain room in that building that they call the dark hole or something. They have a name for it. And so I got to see this place, and she said there's this stuff that leaks out of the wall, and we have no idea what it is. And I've seen things like that before, where it's stuff leaking out of the wall, but it's dried on. It looks like maybe somebody spilled something there. This was not like that. It was this black stuff coming out of the wall and like creating a puddle, and you could see it running down the sides of the wall. They have no idea what it is. The likelihood of it being something haunted is slim, but I would be curious to see what that likely was for sure. But okay. Now I know we talked about ghosts and how nobody here has a ghost in their house, which you may not, or you, like I said, you just have it turned off. But I have it turned on most of the time. So we lived in Desert Bloom for 6 months. We rented a house out there for 6 months, and it was great living there. We were loving it. And then one night, my son, who was 10 years old or 9 years old at the time, about 3 o'clock in the morning, he came storming into our bedroom and said, "Mom, where's Dad?" And I said, "He's sleeping in the bed next to me, buddy." He's like, "Oh, good." And then he went back to bed. So I didn't think anything of it. The next morning, we got up, and he was pretty miserable, pretty crabby little kid, actually. And I said, "What's the problem? Why are you so grumpy?" And he said, "Mom, really?" He said, "How do you not know?" He goes, "I came into your room last night." And I said, "But you didn't tell me why." And he said, "Well," he said, I woke up and I rolled over and I could see Dad standing in the dining room. And he was wearing a big hat. And it looked just like Dad. And then all of a sudden, he dissolved and turned into dust. So I had to make sure he was okay. So this is the first story. And he started seeing, but I eventually thought maybe his imagination was running wild until I had an experience in the house. I was home by myself, and it was like 11 o'clock in the morning, and I was getting ready to go out, and I was in my bedroom, and I heard the door open, close, and like my kid walked in and threw his backpack on the ground and kicked off his shoes kind of noise. So Joel did have a spare, my other son, so I called him and I said, "Hey Joel, come here," but he never did. So I went down to talk to him in his room, and he was nowhere in the house to be found. And I heard him clear as day come in the house. So I go back to my bedroom, and some of the rooms in the house had those sensor lights, and we also had a little dog as well. So I go back to my room, and all of a sudden the laundry room light goes on all by itself. And I'm home alone, and there's nobody there. So I'm like, I wonder if Anna snuck in. So I went and I checked. Nope, she was still sleeping in her bed in the living room. So I kind of brushed it off because I don't like being scared. And then one night I was sleeping and I woke up, and because the bathroom light had a sensor and the light kept going off, and it did that all night. I got up twice to check on Jude to make sure he was still in his bed, and both times he was. So there are ghosts all the way from Medicine Hat to Desert Blue, and I believe it has to do a lot to do with the history that's here as well. Okay. So do we have any students that went to Connaught School? Did you? Did you ever have any experiences there? No? Anybody else? No? Connaught School is known to be one of the most haunted schools in Medicine Hat. I think followed by Elm Street is from what I'm gathering, is those two schools have a lot of activity. So opening on October 11th, 1913, Connaught School was named after the Duke of Connaught, and it sure has had its fair share of ghostly visitors. It has been said that you can hear children wandering the hallways and the stairwells on non-school days. I recently had a tour of the school and a lovely visit with a lady who works there, and she mentioned to me that while she is there late at night catching up on some late night marking, she often has to get up from her desk to make sure that she's locked the doors because she can hear children running up and down the stairwells. Of course, this makes being alone in a big school, a big old school, a little bit nerve-wracking, so she decided to invite her dogs to join her, but that came to an abrupt end when they refused to go inside the school. Now, there is one spirit in particular that many of the staff and students have seen roaming the halls, and he is known as the man with the top hat. Now, if you remember correctly, the school was opened in 1913 and named after the Duke of Connaught. Don't worry, it was a black and white cat across their path, not a black one. Okay, so the school is named after the Duke of Connaught. Now, remember, I also am a medium, and my lovely new teacher friend decided she wanted to put my abilities to the test. So she asked me if I was picking up on anything, and at first I didn't, but the moment she asked, that's when everything started flowing, and eventually a man did join us on our tour. So we toured through all the hallways, and I got to see all the rooms and all of that, and then she took me down to the basement, which is not here. It was right where these windows are, I think, but down in the basement. And so she took me down to the basement, and we were glancing through all the old photos of the school, and I saw a picture of a guy standing there, and he was looking directly at me, and I said, that's him, that's the guy that's been following us. And she told me that was the Duke of Connaught. So apparently he likes to check in on his schools.
Let's pause for a moment so we can share some exciting news. We're proud to announce that our work here at Bring Back the Porch is getting noticed. From October to the end of January, our videos and reels viewed more than 1 million times. Some of those viewers could be your customers, so sponsoring Bring Back the Porch is a great way to get your message in front of them too. If you'd like to support our work here at Bring Back the Porch, we ask you to go to our website at bringbacktheporch.com and follow the links. Thank you for your support.
So when we drive by the school, I'm always mesmerized because this school was built with bare hands. You know, very little machinery, very little help, and it's still standing. And it looks great. So when I decided to start these haunted tours, I went on to Ask the Hat, which, is everybody familiar with Ask the Hat?
Yep.
Yeah, if you need to know anything, you go to Ask the Hat. Everybody has an answer there, always. So I went to Ask the Hat. I asked for ghost stories. By the time the post wrapped up, there were 375 comments. And not to mention the messages that I was receiving as well. So there's lots of haunting going on here in the Hat. One thing I do want to mention is a lot of times I did learn that when you talk about ghosts, people want to put a spin on it where that ghost is evil. Rarely does that happen. A lot of times it's just a ghost that belongs to the house because they liked living there or they belong to the land or anything like that. But this one story came to me and I haven't changed anything. So this story is written by a lady named Abby. I believe I lived in a haunted house with my husband and son 5 years ago. The address was on 10th Street Southeast, and it was a tiny little blue house on the southeast hill. Very old and said to be built in the 1800s to early 1900s. I had a number of things happen to both me and my family while living there. Not bad things, just unusual things that reminded us that we were not alone. I actually had a team of professionals come into my house to help me set the spirit free. They told me a number of things. The family that lived there, however long ago, had a disabled son. So during that time period of the late 1800s to early 1900s, you were considered a social outcast for having a disability or having a disabled child. You were considered an embarrassment. These people had supposedly locked their son in the cement basement for a lot of his life, and eventually he succumbed to his death down there. The basement is still a cement basement, as is the laundry area of the house. And I remember going down there to do my laundry and feeling a very strong presence watching me, standing beside me, looking over my shoulder, right beside me anytime I went down there. The basement door would swing open and closed, and when I threw laundry down the basement stairs, it would fly and hit the one side of the wall, as if someone was standing on the stairs, hitting it out of the way. I never felt scared or negative about any of this, but it was something I'd never experienced before, and it definitely kept me up at night. Nothing happened anywhere else in the house, only in the basement. I hired that team of investigators to come to my home, and they claim they set him free. We all felt a huge weight leave the house. We cried. It was a surreal experience. The house still stands to this day, and according to its current tenant, it's still very old, still very creaky, and still very creepy. But Abby loved living there. We had Tamara Miller, a local numerologist, spend some time looking into the numerology of this address, only to find the number 666. In the numbers world, that means stop or proceed with caution. So, speaking of the number 666, there is a building nearby that many of us frequent, sometimes more frequently than we would like. Some leave, some never do, but that's not the point of this eerie tale. See, the building that I'm referring to has an address where the first 3 digits are indeed 666. Yes, you heard me correctly, I said 666. And yes, it is a building that we all frequently visit. There have been many stories that have come to the surface regarding this property, but no one has been brave enough to reveal them. In fact, I had a certain someone lined up to do an interview who used to work there, but the moment they agreed to the interview, strange things started happening to them, so they decided to decline in the end. But before we get into any of the stories, I'd like to talk about the number 666. To get some understanding of these bizarre numbers, we met with renowned numerologist Tamara Miller. And according to the numerology, this number means stop or halt. And does that mean you shouldn't enter the doors? Well, I guess that's up to you because you may not have a choice. The simple fact is we all have to use this facility at some time in our life. But do keep in mind what the 666 means for you. Be aware of yourself, be aware of other energies in the building, and I'm sure you will remain safe. Walk in the doors with anger and resentment, and you are likely to receive that in return. There have been many stories about children being seen in the hallways, soldiers in the rooms, and other spirits who inhabit this building. but one in particular caught my attention. The story is short and sweet, but there is a plot twist. You see, this building has an elevator that has a tendency to take a small detour whenever it feels like it. Its traveler may request the floor that they need, but they should always be prepared to visit a different floor if the elevator chooses. A detour to the 6th floor. Any guesses where I'm speaking of? Anybody know? The hospital. Correct. So the 666 is a very interesting number. And I know I gave you guys your power days, but the next thing I'm going to give you is the number 666. It means stop or halt. It doesn't mean the devil's coming for your soul. It just means stop whatever it is that you're doing. So maybe you're driving, you're in your car, and you happen to look in your rearview mirror and you spot your face and you think, oh my gosh, I look terrible. I should have never left the house like this. And then you look in front of you and there's a license plate that says whatever letters and then 666. That is stop the negative talk. I use 666 when I shop because when I get the total that has a 666 in it, it's like, okay, it's time to put my wallet away. I've used that a few times. Don't challenge that one because I tried it once for fun and it wasn't very fun. So don't challenge it, but do know that the 666 does not mean the devil's coming for you. It just means stop whatever it is that you're doing because it's not working. And it doesn't mean maybe think about stopping. It means stop, like stop it right now. Okay. So this is going to be our stop. Does anybody know where we are?
It's a funeral home or
Uh,
embalming place?
No, this is actually belongs to the city of Medicine Hat. What most people don't know is the old hillside cemetery was quite large at one time. And I've heard other stories about the cemetery that I'm going to finalize and turn it into a tour. I need to make sure that that's accurate information. But the cemetery once spread all the way this way and all the way towards the skate park and up behind these buildings. But most people don't know that because we've always known it to be the little cemetery in the back over here. So this was the only story. I'm going to grab my book because I don't remember all the dates. This is the only story that I actually had to take a break while writing this script because this one kind of made my heart sink a little bit. So the first person to be buried in the old hillside cemetery was Colin McKay, who was buried in the Church of England section, and he died on March 1st, 1884. The last burial was George Cully on November 29th, 1922. On October 15th, 1947, the ashes of Marie Burden Redpath were laid to rest. But after this date, the cemetery was no longer used. Why, you ask?
Why?
Thank you. The continuous flooding of Seven Persons Creek. So the Old Hill Cemetery used to extend all the way around here, like I said before. But then after this flooding started, they started moving bodies to the New Hillside Cemetery, which is in the south end of the city. There was a particularly bad flood in 1908. And that flood was extreme enough that it caused a big push to move the bodies and the headstones over to the New Hillside Cemetery. And the reason for that was because it was such a flood that it caused erosion, which caused bodies in the graves to come out of the ground and float down Seven Persons Creek. So that was in 1908. So now we could happen while we're sleeping and I wouldn't even know it. But in 1908, that would have been sheer panic and a very tragic time for our community. So just something to know, a little bit of our history. We're actually going to go into the cemetery now. The scariest thing in there might be the mosquitoes. So I do have bug spray if anybody needs it. Also, where we go. Does anybody know what these are?
Dowsing rods.
Dowsing rods. So we're going to take these into the cemetery. We're going to try and pick up on some energies and some ghosts out there. I will show everybody how to use them once we get there. You do not have to take a pair if you don't want to, but they're here if you want to use them. Okay, so they're very easy to use, but at one time, years and years and years ago, before we had all the equipment we have now, you used to hire the witcher to come to your property. What they were looking for was water. So if you had to dig a well, you'd hire the witcher, they'd come to your property, and they'd either use 2 sticks or they'd use a stick with a Y in it, and they would use that to find water on your property, and 99.99% of the time, they were exactly right.
Imagine being in the boardroom with the world's most influential C-suite executives, exploring big questions about the economy, AI, and hybrid work. Welcome to C-Suite Perspectives, hosted by Steve Odland, President and CEO of the Conference Board, the ultimate podcast for professionals seeking the truth beyond trending headlines. Cut through the noise and dive into data-driven discussions, unbiased, nonpartisan, and straight from the top. Listen to C-Suite Perspectives and harness the power of trusted insights for what's ahead.
So what you do is you put them out in front of you, and they can detect energy. And yeah, they're very easy. So they might cross, but you hold on to them not super tight. Some people have actually had the experience that they've become magnetic, which could be anything. I'm not saying it's ghost related, but it's kind of cool. And it always seems to happen like right kind of where you're standing, all the way there. Weird things happen there all the time with these. So if you're looking for something cool, hold them out in front of you. You can actually ask questions. If you actually want to ask questions to ghosts, you can. And you can ask in the form of saying, what is yes? And then the rods will move to show you what yes is. Or you can ask, and then you have to do the same thing for no. Or I've also seen people say, okay, if you are a boy ghost, go right. And if they go right, then you know that's a yes. I have seen these out here. I'm going to force it. I'm making this happen, but I've actually seen people doing this. Not in a while, though, but I've definitely seen it. So anyway, we have about 10 minutes here for you guys to explore. When the time comes to go, I will ring this bell. Stop just like that. That's when it's time to go back to the trolley, because I almost forgot someone one time, so I want to make sure everybody makes it back. And if you have any questions, I will be around. Yeah.
What's the gated off thing over there?
You know what? These were the gates. I was told were for plots. So if people bought the whole plot for their family, that was the gate. There's a lot of children that are in here. I did ask the Esplanade in the archives about that, and she said that it was because it was an expense for the family to move the bodies, so a lot of them just moved headstones or didn't move them at all. Thank you. And so lots of the children were left, probably financial issues, but also there's a lot of unmarked graves because a lot of the stones went, but the bodies did not. So yeah. And we've never had anything super scary happen here. It's always been very mellow and very nice. So just watch out for 666.
Did you go missing, Edwin? Yes? Thank you. Did they ever find you? Kinda? Were you out playing? No? Were you out playing? Go back if yes. had other questions. So he was out playing when he went missing.
Interesting. It's fun.
Are you okay talking to us? Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we have to go.
There you go.
Thank you, Edwin.
All right, so part 2 of the tour. So I'm actually going to go off the cuff again here because years ago, well, okay, like 2 years ago. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. 2 years ago when I started these tours, I actually had one of the drivers, I called it the Haunted Trolley Tour, but it was actually, I ended up changing it because she said, but the trolley's not haunted. And I said, yeah, that's a good point. So I changed it to Haunted Medicine Hat instead. So fast forward to last summer, and we had a special tour with a mystery medium. So nobody knew who the medium was going to be on the trolley. It was just a guest that was riding with us. Nobody knew who it was till we got to the cemetery. So it was my friend Cheryl from Moose Jaw. And so we got to the cemetery and I introduced her and she stood right up and she said, who's got a dog? Someone's got to have a dog that passed because there's been a dog sitting at my feet, panting on my feet and drooling all over all night. Who's got this dog? And nobody in the trolley could relate to this dog. In the meantime, I'm listening to her talk. And I'm like, well, we got to get off the trolley, just, trying to hurry her up a little bit. And then I started thinking, I'm like, I wonder if it isn't Gracie. Anybody who knows who Gracie is, a lot of people do, especially if you live in the South End. There's a gentleman that used to walk his dog in a little red wagon, and he had a little umbrella that sat over the wagon. Does everybody remember that? Yeah. Well, that dog had passed away about 2 weeks before. I saw it on Facebook, and I'm like, I wonder if it was Gracie. And so Cheryl's going on and on about this dog, and all of a sudden she says, I don't know. She said, I want to say this dog, it's a basset hound. Why is it a basset hound? And Gracie was also a basset hound. So my story now is that she doesn't ride the wagon because it's now occupied by Sadie the dog. She rides the red trolley. So it is a haunted trolley tour. Okay. So this story is one of my favorites, and I haven't really changed anything about it. I was very cautious when I wrote this tour to be very respectful to any of the spirits that have passed, but also their families. And so I didn't cover, of course there's stories that we hear that have made it worldwide about Medicine Hat. I never cover those out of respect for the families, but I was able to kind of include a little bit of that into this story. But out of a respectful way, because I believe that has to be done. Micah O and her friend Layla were walking home one evening at approximately 3 a.m. after a fun-filled late night at the local pub. They were chatting up a storm about how much fun they had when Layla suddenly stopped and asked about the home in a neighborhood that they were traveling through. She had heard many stories about, but was seeking the truth about what actually happened in this haunted home. Micah, a huge true crime fan, was eager to tell what she knew. They sat down on the curb in front of the house and Micah shared what she knew about this haunted home. Being a little superstitious, she did hesitate, and knowing that her and her friend were literally right outside the home where everything took place sent shivers down her spine. Now, for those of you that don't know, the hours between 3 and 4 a.m. have been known as the witching hour, as many unusual and strange things seem to happen within these 60 minutes. And this time was no exception because it was indeed 3:05 a.m. But Micah chose to continue on with her tale. After she completed her story, the girls took a moment of silence to show their respect and then decided to continue their trek home. Seconds later, they heard a strange sound that sounded like the thumping bass sound coming from an oncoming car. The girls ignored the strange sound because there was no vehicle in sight and all the homes in the neighborhood were dark. As the girls continued to leave the neighborhood, the music got louder and louder, but the strange thing was, the song was unidentifiable. At this point, they were about 3 houses away from the haunted home, and the music continued to get louder and louder. It appeared to be coming from a white van that was parked across the street. They proceeded to walk towards the van, which was most certainly where that music was coming from. The van was not running, had no lights on, and all the lights in the home where it was parked appeared to be off. Not a single soul to be seen. The girls crept closer to the van, and they peered inside, expecting to see the lights of the radio glowing throughout. But there was nothing. The interior was dark. Micah and Layla were terrified. They ran until they reached home. Confused and scared, they both went straight to bed, not knowing what to say or what to think. To this day, there has been no explanation to that spooky evening. Perhaps it was the spirit of a lingering soul attempting to tell their side of the story. Okay. Did anybody attend our haunted house last year? No? We did a haunted house, and of course you didn't work there. But we did a haunted house at Cape School, which is the old St. Louis school in the Flats. Is anybody familiar with that school?
Yeah.
Did anybody go to that school? Nobody?
My son.
Did he? Did he ever have stories?
No, we just don't put yours.
Okay. The biggest stories we heard was that, first of all, there was a fire at one time, and that upstairs was the residence where the nuns stayed. We heard that. And there had been a fire, so the gym and the one portion of the side of the school is newer. And then, of course, there's the other part that they added on after the fact, but very new. But we didn't really hear a whole lot. The whole building doesn't have a ton of history that we were aware of. But we did have some experiences, and what people don't realize is that the scarers that were there that night weren't the only ones doing the work. We had two very interesting experiences while working in that building. We did do a paranormal investigation of it first, just because we had the building for the month, and it was a pretty active investigation, to put it mildly. But there was one girl that was part of the haunted house that she had two experiences, and one was witnessed, one was not. But she was in one of the rooms, and in the room there was a little shelf, and there was a doll that was sitting on the shelf, and there was another lady who was one of the guides of the tour, and she didn't believe in ghosts or anything like that or any hauntings, but she loved Halloween. And she's standing in the doorway. The other girl is standing kind of like about 2 feet away from the shelf. So the girl that was standing near the shelf left the room, and as she walked away, and Michelle saw with her own eyes, the doll actually not fell, but he flew off the shelf and hit the girl. And Michelle was blown away, and for the rest of the time we were in there, that's all she talked about was this doll. And that same person, not Michelle, but the other person, she was ducked into a closet one night doing some recording, like what you're doing right now, and she heard someone behind her. And this is while the haunted house was in full motion. And she turned around and she apologized. She's like, "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to take your scare." And then she continued to record. And then she turned her phone on afterwards, and there was no one behind her. So there's one floor of that school that at the very, very top. And that's the one floor that if I was stuck up there being the last one to turn off the lights, I hated it every single night. I knew there was nothing creepy, just ghostly up there. And then the other day on this tour, there was a couple, I think his wife worked at the school, and she worked up on that floor, and they had some experiences, but yeah, it was interesting, to say the least. So we're just heading into Strathcona Park. I've got a couple of stories I want to tell with you. My daughter has asked me to tell this story tonight. So, yeah, that's my daughter in the back with a white shirt doing this. Anyway, so this is not a story that happened in Medicine Hat, but it's something that happened to me, and I love this story, and I just want to share it tonight. So we lived in a house, quite an old house. It was 1911. It was built, or 1912, I think. And one night I was laying in bed with my son. He was about 4 or 5 years old at the time. And he was cuddling and talking away about his day. And then all of a sudden he stopped and he said, "Mommy, do you see that little girl right there?" And I said, "What little girl?" And he said, "That one." And he pointed to the end of our bed. And I was like, who? I don't see a little girl. And I said, what'd she look like? She looks like Maggie. And I said, oh, what's she wearing? And he's, a pretty dress. I said, what color? He said, it's purple. And I said, oh, it's purple. And then in the meantime, I can hear footsteps coming up the stairs. And it's my other son. And he comes into the room and he turns the light on. And Jude, my little guy, he says, oh, she's gone. As soon as the light went off. I said, hey, Joel, turn the light off for a second. So he turned the light off. And Jude said, oh, there she is. So anyway, the following week I was talking to Maggie, because she used to see ghosts all the time. And I said, you told me about this girl in the house that she wears a purple dress. And Jude sees her, so I told him everything that happened. She said, Mom, her dress isn't purple, it's pink. So apparently we had a little girl roaming around our house. Do you remember that? Seeing her? No, of course you don't. Anyway. Okay, we're just about there. Did anybody see my video that I did on Facebook? Okay, well, I did it as a way to lure people to come into the tour tonight. But there is a story that I tell on all my tours because it's about my mom. She passed when I was 29. She always said she was going to haunt me, and she did. So we were moving away from Moose Jaw, and we were moving out of this house, and I was cleaning up, and I was almost done. All I had to do was wipe out the kitchen cupboards. So I open up the drawer in the kitchen, and I'm cleaning away, come to this drawer, I open it up, and inside this drawer is about 100 bread tanks, all laying flat in the bottom of the drawer. So you can imagine what that's going to be like to pick up. So I'm like, oh, I should have put those stupid bread tanks. Oh, another thing you need to know, I only saved the bread tanks because my mom used to save bread tanks. So it's the only reason why the bread tanks are in the drawer anyway. So I thought to myself, I should put these bread tanks in a basket by the sink like Mom did. I knew I should have put them in this basket. The moment I said that, I heard a very loud laugh, like a cackle, and it was her laugh, loud and clear, but I was completely alone in my house. So I even actually went to the door to see if someone had come in, and we lived on a farm, so we had no neighbors. So I froze. I literally froze, and my heart skipped a beat. I actually had to sit down for a few minutes to compose myself because I can hear other people's ghosts, but when they're my own, I don't like that as much. So finally I got it all back together, and I stood up from the stool that I was sitting on, took a deep breath, and I was like, okay, let's pick up these stupid bread tanks. And I looked down in that drawer, and in that drawer are approximately 10 bread tanks that were date side up, that all said MA19 on them. And my mom passed away on May the 19th. So what are the odds? So she still has her things that she does, they're just not quite as extreme as that. River's high. It's extremely high. Okay, so we are just beside, of course, our beautiful Saskatchewan River. I used to work at Police Point Park, and I had learned about the point at Police Point Park. And I worked there for about a year, a little bit over a year. And for months, I looked for the point and couldn't find it. And for those of you that don't know about the point, it's point at Police Point Park. But it's also the area where the Seven Persons Creek and Ross Creek meet with the Saskatchewan River. But it's also the story, apparently, where the Medicine Hat took place. So if anybody's familiar with the story of the Medicine Hat, it took place at the point at Police Point Park. So we've been told. Anyway, so one day I told the staff that I was working with, I said, I'm going out for a walk and I'm going to take my time. And I slowly walked along the riverbank and I just made my way through. And all of a sudden, I heard noises that weren't familiar, and I looked up and I was at the point. At the place that I had been looking for the past year was all of a sudden right there in front of me, and I was at the point. So it was a very odd thing that happened, but it had a very strong energy to it. So if you haven't been able to get to the point, I encourage you to do it. You can kind of see where those pelicans are over there, the white blob there, that's where the point is. It's right in there. Then that's apparently a really great place if you want to fish for sturgeon. They jump a lot there. But I believe that it's a healing vortex as well, especially with the stories that are attached to it. So if you ever have a chance to go check it out, I highly recommend it and have your own experience with the point. Okay. Kind of very busy today. What's really interesting about the point though is that the water appears to be going all different directions and you can't figure out which way the water's actually moving. It's obviously going around the bend, but when you're staring at the water, it doesn't look like it. It's almost mesmerizing. All right, whenever you're ready. So the other thing about this river that a lot of hatters don't know about is it used to have a supposed river monster. So I actually found a couple of articles about the river monster. One was from June 6, 1949, where there had been yet another sighting of the apparent river monster, and it was described as being 2 feet wide, at least 8 feet long, and moved at a speed of about 15 miles per hour. Now, this wasn't the only sighting of the creature. A woman was walking her dogs here in Strathcona Park, and she stopped by to let them play by the water. And when she did, she claimed that the giant river monster arose from the waters, attacking her dogs. So, any ideas what the river monster might actually be?
A giant bull snake.
A bull snake? No, it came from under the water, but that's a really good guess. Because bull snakes swim. Sturgeon. So that's what I thought. I thought for sure that's just a sturgeon. But my boss at Police Boy pointed out to me that sturgeons are bottom feeders, not surface feeders. So they actually go on the bottom of the river. They do jump though. But there's another fish that does feed on birds and things like that that are on the surface. And they do get that big. Any idea what that might be?
Jackfish?
A jackfish. True. Jackfish. So now my theory on that was if it was 8 feet long and that wide and that fast, it must have been a very big fish. But I was always told that, because I lived in Nipwood, Saskatchewan for a while, and I was always told that the reason why the fish were so big there was because the river was very deep and the river was also very, very cold there. So that's why they got so big. So maybe it's a river monster after all. So the next time you float down the river on one of your floaties, just remember to keep your feet inside. Okay. So for those of you that don't know, I used to own a store downtown called Miller's Emporium. It was between the Beverage and Friday's Image. And I moved into that shop last September, and I recently sold my business, so I'm not there anymore. But when we first started going there, I always brought a little dog with me, 4-pound Yorkie. And the first few times that we would go, the first week, she wouldn't go inside. I had to carry her through the door. She refused to go inside. Absolutely refused. And she would shake at the door kind of thing. From then on, after she started going in on her own, she would come in the back door, and then when you came in the back door, it was a flight of stairs, or you could take the hallway into the store. And she'd always hug the wall as far away as possible from those stairs. But the strangest thing that happened to me in that store with my dog, I was at the very back end of the store, and she was at the very front. And this happened more than once. I called her, and she came running, and then as she was running, all of a sudden she stopped and just fell over and just laid there and would not move, would not budge. I'd have to go over and pick her up. She would not move. But it was like somebody just stopped her and started petting her because she'd roll over onto her belly, like someone was scratching her belly. So then Maggie was working with me one day, and she said, "Mom, I think Anna's sick." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because she's just laying there with her belly open and she's not moving and no one's touching her." And my husband saw it too. So I felt it was probably one of the original owners of the business, in my opinion. Okay. So this is the final story of the night, and it's one of Medicine Hat's oldest ghost stories. Has anybody heard the story of the Phantom Train?
Yes.
Yeah. Who?
The ghost train.
The Ghost Train? Okay. So it was the summer. You know what? I'm going to do this differently. I'm going to usually save this part to the end, but I've had a couple of CP employees on the trolley tours, and they say that to this very day they still see the Phantom Train. It was the summer of 1908 when Gus Day, a railroad fireman, and Bob Toohey, the engineer, jumped on the train named the Crow and headed west towards the Crow's Nest Pass. It was only June, but it was so hot that it felt like midsummer, and the humidity filled the air. Gus's job was to add coal and stoke the fire and keep that train running. It was a tough and dirty job, but he was working in his way to becoming an engineer, so this was a small price to pay. The job was definitely in his sights, and all he needed was a position to become vacant. Bob Toohey, on the other hand, was already there. He was an engineer, but he wanted to help Gus succeed, so he helped him study and work towards his goals. The two men headed down the single track through the cut banks towards the village of Dunmore, where the CPR main line connects. Now, whether you were coming in or out of the hack, you would travel this lonely line, hoping that the operator had done his job and that two trains, one inbound and one outbound, were not riding the rails at the same time. The two men traveled through the cut banks, left and right through the river, and while Gus stoked the fire. It was so hot and humid that he stuck his head out the window just for a moment to get a breath of fresh air. He froze in fear when he saw the light of another train coming towards them. Seconds away from colliding, Gus became white as a ghost, but managed to yell at Toohey to hit the brakes. Toohey reached for the brakes, and the two men prepared to jump. What happened next was jaw-dropping. The oncoming train suddenly split from the track, the only track, and it glided through the air on the right side. The men watched as the coach passed by, and as the crew waved as it continued down the non-existent tracks. A hollow, mournful whistle filled the night air. A week later, Gus took a new assignment as a fireman on the day train, known as the Spokane Flyer. It was a longer haul, but more money, and it was one step closer to becoming an engineer. All he needed was a position to become vacant. This train would depart right after the Crow came in. It would couple up with the cars in Dunmore and make a round trip through Washington State. Gus was thankful for the trip and the light of day as he remembered the Phantom Train from lonely nights before. Bob Toohey, on the other hand, was not doing so well. The two men had bumped into each other days before, and after a short chat about the lives, the weather, and anything else but the train, Toohey asked Gus if he saw the ghost train. It was hard to miss, he replied. Toohey said that he couldn't stop thinking about it, and that he had been to see a reader who reads palms and cues and such. She told him that death would get him before the first of the month. He told Gus he was going to take some time off for the next few days in an attempt to cheat death. The end of the month came and went, and death did not make an appearance. It was now the beginning of July, and memories of the Phantom Train had faded away like the days of summer. And now Gus wasn't even sure he saw that train at all. In the weeks ahead, he made multiple trips to Dunmore with no signs of the ghost train. Toohey was back to work, once again assigned to the Crow. All was well, and things finally seemed to be getting back to normal. On July 6th, Gus was aboard the Crow alongside engineer Jim Nicholson, heading towards the Dunmore Junction. They had just cleared the first cut bank when a light appeared on the horizon. Gus called out for Jim to start braking, and the two men prepared to jump. The Phantom Train blew past them again on non-existent tracks. The crew waved as they flew by, and the whistle blew as it vanished out of sight. Once again, the two men were silent. 2 days later, on a beautiful morning, Gus was getting ready for his usual shift on the Spokane Flyer when he was assigned to yard duty to cover a shift for a coworker. A fireman took his place, leaving with Jim Nicholson just after dawn. Shortly after, the fireman returned running, sweating, and covered in soot. He also had a severe burn to his right arm. He brought grave news. The Spokane Flyer had collided with the Crow on the single track just outside of Medicine Hat. The same stretch of track where Gus Day Bob Toohey and Jim Nicholson had encountered the phantom train. The crash turned both engines into twisted piles of metal, and there were 7 crew members that died that day, including Jim Nicholson and Bob Toohey. So that is one of Medicine Hat's oldest ghost stories. If you want to hear more about it, you can listen to it on a podcast called Fireside Canada, and they even get into what can the train actually be. Is anybody here from Saskatchewan? Anybody know the phantom train in St. Louis? No?
Yeah, I've heard of that one.
Have you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the phantom train was a phantom light that you would see at St. Louis, Saskatchewan. It was an old railway bed, and they had scientists investigate it, and they can't figure out where the light's coming from. There's no explanation. So, okay. So this is the last story of the evening. All right. So if you look this way, you can see an empty parking lot. At the very end where that mural is, that used to be the Royal Hotel. It was the music. The owners there were great people, and they took great care of the staff. But the music brought the people in, and we all became really good friends, said the gentleman sitting across from me that day. The Royal, the Good Times Bar, proudly displayed on his black t-shirt. When this caught my eye, I knew this was going to be a great story. Don Miner started as a customer at the Royal years ago, and he loved the place so much that he would help out the staff whenever they needed a hand. This led to a job as a bouncer, and eventually he would become the manager. When I asked Don about the ghostly inhabitants, he only recalled one. There was a ghost that lived in the basement, and it was a friendly ghost who loved the Beatles. Every time the Beatles would come on the sound system, the music would get louder. But here's the catch. When the song was over, the sound on the system would go back down again. Although this ghost was never given a name, I feel compelled to call him Rick. Rick was a great spirit who loved to help out. The staff always knew there was a problem because they could see through a small hole in the basement, in the floor that led to the basement, and if the light was on, they knew that there was a problem in the basement, and Rick was letting them know. So Don would head downstairs, and sure enough, there was an empty CO2 canister or a leak or something that needed his attention. Rick did his job very well. One day the janitor was off, so the staff stayed late to get the work done for the next day. There was a washer and dryer in the basement used for washing towels and tablecloths. So Don went downstairs to throw a load into the washer, and then he headed back upstairs to mop and vacuum. When he went back downstairs to move the load from the washer to the dryer, it had already been done and the dryer was running. We all need a ghost like Rick. I do wonder if he folds though. But Rick did not go unappreciated. Every Christmas around the 23rd of December, Don would purchase 2 beers and head downstairs and have a Christmas drink with Rick. On September 16th, 2022, the historic Royal Hotel burnt to the ground, leaving only memories behind. Fond memories for anyone who had the pleasure of visiting the Royal. Perhaps Rick has moved on, but perhaps he's still there waiting for Don's next Christmas visit. All right, thank you everybody. Thank you for coming. I hope you all had a great time. Like I said, our walking tours are July 31st. They start. If you're interested in more ghost stories about downtown Medicine Hat, please feel free to join me on one of those tours. Also, we will be doing our haunted house again back at Cape School in October. And one last thing is, if you're interested in paranormal investigating at all, we will be doing some investigations towards the end of August into September. So if you're really ghosty, we're doing lots of ghosty things. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Hey, this is Brian again, and I'd like to ask you to do a favor. We can't do this work without people like you, so if you can, please like, share, subscribe, tell your friends about Bring Back the Porch.